Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Welcome, everyone, to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 225. This episode's going to air on June 9th. And Don, we got a pretty interesting topic to talk about tonight. We got 6 great questions. We hope we're going to be able to get to all of that. But no one has ever talked about this subject tonight, and we're going to dive into it because I think that this topic, I don't remember anyone ever discussing it to the level we plan on it, and you just brought it up. So I'm going to let you do the intro of it, and we'll go back and forth as we go through.
Well, nobody else has ever talked about it yet, but I'm going to guess that we're going to stir up some food for thought for a lot of people, and that's fine. But I got to thinking, we're setting up for a fantastic antler growing season this year. I mean, we had a really mild winter, probably one of the mildest that I ever remember in my entire lifetime. We had just a handful of days where it was really cold right at the very end of the Illinois season, but I'm thinking only like 3 or 4 days. And other than that, I think the temperatures were above normal for most of the winter. I know that I was trying to mow down my NutriCrave corn in my plots, and I like to do that on frozen ground. You just don't rut up the ground, and when you chop up those stalks and the ears that are on there, you're not pushing them down into the mud. They stay up on top of the ground and all. And I was having a very difficult time finding a period where the ground was froze, and I was home off the consulting trail. It finally happened, but I had to get out there at daylight before the sun came out and warm the ground up early one morning to get that done. But so it all started with last winter, that really mild winter. And then we had an early spring. Temperatures warmed up early. I know I planted about 600 and some trees on my new 40 acres that butts up to my farm here, and planted every one of them in March. The ground was not frozen March. It was dry enough I'd get in there. And then not long after I got those in, then we started getting timely rains. Just the best year for starting trees that I think I've ever seen. But also we got that early green growth on a lot of the plants, not just like the clover, alfalfa, things like that, the wheat fields, winter wheat fields and whatever, just the native plants, the trees and bushes and such, they greened up probably 2 to 3 weeks earlier, or came out of dormancy 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they typically do. So these deer came out of a very mild winter with an early spring, and they've had timely rains ever since, promoting good plant growth. And now we're into June, and this coming week here in Illinois, we're supposed to have temperatures in the 90s. And some of our listeners that have been with us for a long time will remember me talking about the captive deer. Back when I had the captive deer years ago, a lot of captive deer breeders really liked hot days for growing antlers. And some guys would even they'd put their bucks in pens that did not have shade. They wanted those bucks out in the sun. And the reason for that was, those growing antlers are full of blood vessels. And those blood vessels are carrying those nutrients out to that growing tissue, that antler tissue. And when it's hot, it actually increases the blood flow. Those antlers act almost like a radiator, cooling the blood. And so there's a whole lot more blood flow with that heat. It's just one positive after another that's been stacking up for the past, 6-8 months, that is leading to probably the best antler growing season I've ever seen. And so I got to thinking about that. I can't wait to get my cameras out and see some of the bucks that I know were still alive to shed antlers this spring. But I got to thinking, there's a lot of these bucks that I'm watching that are not going to be shooters this year. I don't expect them to be shooters this year just because of their age. And I got to thinking, they may put on a tremendous jump in antler growth this year, add a lot of inches. And next year, if we don't have really good antler growing conditions, those bucks very well may go backwards from what they are this year.
Meaning this year could be the best they're going to be either ever or for a while.
Absolutely, especially those bucks that are, say, 4 years and older. Those are the bucks that, a good 4-year-old this year, he may have the best rack that he's ever going to have if we have poor antler growing seasons for the next 2 or 3 years. So what's that mean to us that are targeting these bucks is you get one of those bucks that's borderline, that you're not sure if you want to shoot him or pass him, but this year may be the best rack he ever has. You may have high hopes for letting him go, and, we never know. He may explode, but we're going to be hard-pressed to have another year where everything stacks up as well as it has this year.
Well, I think you go back and look at the winter of 2022 into 23, and it was the worst that I remembered ever been. I mean, you and I, every buck that we were watching went down. We only knew through all of our friends and all of our buddies, and we have a lot of people talk to us about deer they're following. Mm-hmm. We only knew of maybe 1 or 2 bucks that blew up. One of them that I think about is Brandon Epperson's buck. He put on a ton. But for the most part, every deer before last hunting season went down, just didn't. So I think the potential from last year to this year, because last year was below average, and this year we have the opportunity for above average conditions. You have both sides of the spectrum. This is one of those years that you could see, especially from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, you could see animals just put on a ton of inches. But no one's ever talked about how that plays into the cycle of your decision coming up, because we're not guaranteed another good season in 2025 or 26.
Right. I mean, literally, this is setting up. I mean, we're still a long ways from the end of the antler growing season, but so far, the last 6 months have set up as well as any year I can ever remember. And I'm 60 years old and been hunting deer for almost 50 now. Things have lined up perfectly this year. And if it continues if it just continues into, say, early August, and we're going to be hard-pressed to match this season again. You make a great point. A year ago, just about every mature buck that I knew of and Flynn's heard of, and people that, consulting clients, whatever, were sending me pictures, most of these bucks were either holding steady or losing a few inches. There was very, very few bucks that had already reached maturity that then put on a bunch of inches last year. And a lot of that was due to the drought as much as anything. We started out with a terrible spring. It was a later spring, and it was an extremely dry spring. We didn't start getting rain here until the 1st of July. The first week of July, the first 10 days of July, we got 6 inches of rain. And that's the only thing that made our corn crop, because there was a period there of 2 or 3 weeks where we got some rain right when that corn was pollinating, but then it dried up again. And the fall food plots last year were absolutely terrible because of the drought. So that long grilling season last year, it started out with a drought, and there was a little wet period in the middle that just made everything, and then another drought at the end. So last year the bucks did terrible, but this year so far it's been absolutely perfect.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to you, but I see also a negative in this. And you always say I'm pessimistic. You look for the good in everything, and I'm always the pessimistic guy that looks for the bad in everything. You know what the bad is?
Well, there's going to be a lot of young bucks that look really good. They're going to get shot.
We're going to get a lot of 3-year-olds that could be absolutely special shot this year. They might be the buck of somebody's lifetime. I mean, that's part of it. I can't ever tell somebody what to shoot and what not to shoot, but in a year like this, that growth of in my area, you're going to have quite a few 145 to 150 inch 3-year-olds that are going to get whacked.
Yeah, I was visiting with a friend, Tim Heath, came by this week, and we were talking about, and he killed some giant bucks. He killed a 200 last year, but he was talking about, the thing that keeps most people from killing good deer is they can't let a 130 go. the percentage of deer hunters who can't let a 130 go is extremely high. And this is not bashing them. It's their right to shoot whatever they want to shoot. But the fact of the matter is those are bucks that are still 2 years away from really being something. And I think that, let's just say we add 10 inches to every buck, every 2 and 3 year old buck to what he would have normally been. Well, that makes that 130 a 140. And that's just a hard buck for a lot of guys to pass up. And it is what it is. So I agree with you. There's a lot of young bucks that are going to get shot just because the hunter they walk by doesn't have the willpower to let them go or doesn't have the desire to let them go.
Yeah. And everybody's got their journey. We've talked about that many times, but we're talking about hunting age structure and big antlers, so it's part of the factor in it. But I just find it fascinating to kind of play the chess game, and that's really what this is in the decision making, because here in another month, we're going to be putting our trail cameras out. I know a lot of guys are already posting social media pictures of their cameras already out now, but in another month, we're going to be putting ours out and getting that first bit of intel, and then we're going to be formulating a plan. But how does that plan factor into 2 years from now based on these conditions? And, this jump start that we've gotten, I'm going to be really disappointed if I don't have a giant somewhere. I'll be honest with you, with what's happened and the deer that we knew about going into the winter, even though they didn't put on a lot, I'm going to be really disappointed if I don't have a giant somewhere.
Yeah, here we are the first week of June, or we just came out of the first week of June, and I've been having guys send me trail camera pictures more indicative of what you would see the first week of July. Right. I put my cameras out the 1st of July every year, and the pictures I've been seeing are the antler growth is at the stage where I would expect to see the 1st of July. And I've got a client that I'm out west. I'm not even going to mention his name because he's pretty well known. Sent me a picture this week of a buck. So far, he's already out to his G4s. I mean, he's already got his G2s, G3s, and he's starting his G4s.
Oh, man.
And the first week of June, that's going to be a super good buck. And that picture is one that I would expect to see the 1st of July. So I'm going to say we're three weeks ahead of the antler growth cycle. Now, the big question is going to be, are these bucks going to finish early? Are they going to have a longer antler growing period, or is the period going to be the same length? It just started early and they're going to finish early. So it'll be interesting to see when these bucks start shedding velvet, towards the end of August. Typically it's around the 1st of September. I've seen a handful shed velvet the last week of August, but it's going to be real interesting to see when they shed velvet this summer.
Do you have any
summer
experience? I mean, can you remember intel from the past that if you, because you never run cameras this time of year, and you said you can't remember a period where we've had this kind of weather. So is this going to be kind of a first for you to see how this plays out?
This is absolutely going to be very unique. I've never seen a year set up like this, and I don't know how. The only way it could have been maybe a little more perfect is we got a little bit too much rain in April. It kept the farmers out of the field, so the soybeans, which the deer really feed on heavily, did not get planted quite as early as I would have liked to have seen them. The soybean fields are just now getting to the point where they got enough growth where the deer hitting them hard. But, with that said, the deer can find plenty of nutritious food sources besides soybeans. I mean, there's clover, but even the natural plants, the natural browse, right, weeds, whatever, there's a lot of those that are very high in protein and the other nutrients as well. So I don't expect that to be a huge negative. But if there was one negative in the whole thing, the whole season, I would say if it had been nice if it would have been dry just a little bit earlier in April, where the farmers could have got those soybeans in about 3 weeks earlier than they did. I don't think that's enough to negate all the positives that we got going for us.
Well, I got a couple more questions as it relates to this topic, but we're going to take a break and listen to our friends from Osseo and be right back with you. Stay tuned.
Osseo Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. the unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. ICO has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
All right, Don, we just got done talking about this, and this whole thing is just fascinating to me about the early antler season growth and what that's going to do in playing part of decisions for whether you're going to shoot a buck this year or not. It feels like I'm playing almost the stock market in annuities here with futures. I mean, it's just, you just don't know the future and what's your best guess. I mean, there's so many variables with wild whitetail. I got a question for you, though, and it kind of goes back into discipline and what we preach all the time. As these pictures start surfacing and we start talking about this rapid antler growing season, and this is going to get people hyped up, I hope. I hope it gets people motivated, right? The last thing we want to do is put too much motivation for people to go start tromping around their properties and running trail cameras too early. We still have to put a game plan together because that big deer is going to be there now, and he's also going to be there in 30 days when we know what he's going to be. The intel that we get from him right now really isn't that important, right?
Yeah, the only thing that's going to change for me, I mean, my method of operation is going to stay the same. I'm going to put my trail cameras out the 1st of July. I'm going to make decisions based on what those, as far as target bucks, based on what I see from those cameras. The thing that might change for me is if there's some bucks that I know of that are up there in age, 5 years plus, that if they're, depending on what I've got to go after, they may get targeted, because to let a 5-year-old go now, hoping that he puts a big jump on after he just had the best antler growing season that he's ever going to have, is taking a big risk. I mean, it happened with Babe last year. I passed Babe the year before, and last year he lost 4 or 5 inches and several points, actually. But this year it could be just the opposite. Instead of losing inches, I think those older bucks are going to put on the best rack of their life. And if he's already 5 years old, I certainly am going to be thinking really hard before I let him go to 6.
Yeah. I just don't want to create that kind of suspense of everybody all of a sudden to start throwing AA lithium batteries in their trail cameras and running out there, putting intrusion on their property. What they see today isn't going to give them one bit of advantage about what they see in 30 or 40 days is my point. I think we're still better off buying our time and putting our cameras out around July 4th versus putting that extra pressure on our properties. Let those deer, grow in peace and staying out as much as possible. Yeah,
you're exactly right. Human intrusion ruins more hunts. There's more deer set by human intrusion. A lot of it's got to do with trail. A lot of people say trail cameras lead to the demise of a lot of big bucks, and they do, no doubt about it. But trail cameras also save a lot of big bucks because the guys that are running them just can't stay away.
Yeah. So we just don't want to create that hype. I mean, this is a special story that's unfolding this year. Even somebody who's been hunting as long as you have hasn't seen this, and is going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But we don't want to create this narrative to where we're putting too much hope in data being collected right now. The data that we want to be collecting is in 30 to 40 days and start getting that, not today.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to gain anything. I mean, yeah, you get an earlier picture of your buck, but still, he's a long way from finishing up. I still will follow the approach of putting my cameras out July 1st, that July 4th weekend, holiday weekend. Everybody's out partying at the lake, having picnics, whatever. Not me. This guy's out in the weeds and the bugs and the sweat, putting out trail cameras, and that'll continue this year just like every other year.
Well, this time of year is probably, outside of when we're carrying fawns, probably the most pivotal time of mineral application right now for the states that allow it. And that's not only for antler growth, but also a good mineral is going to also be helping that doe with lactation and making sure she's providing as much milk for those fawns as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you live in a state where you can put mineral out and get it out right now, the bucks will be hammering it, as will the does. So this is when they need it.
Yeah. So if you follow the Real World social media, we've been posting almost every single day has been about all of our people posting about putting mineral out now. Hopefully you've had it out since about January, February, but now is the peak consumption of when they need it, and just as almost important about those fawns being taken care of as the antlers. But I'm really excited to see this unfold, buddy. I mean, when there's something that's going on in the deer woods that you've never seen, that's kind of special to me, to be honest with you, because you've been doing this for an awful long time.
Well, what excites me is I know where there's some pretty decent bucks at that were pretty decent last year. Boy, if they can just put it on, I'll be fired up come fall. I will be anyway, but I got one buck in particular that he's an older buck. He's not on my farm. It'll be 100% permission property. There'll be no food plots. It's a real world buck in every sense of the word. I got permission on a piece of private ground where this buck lives, and I've got his picture for the last 3 years, but he's just a clean 10-pointer. Last year he was only a 9. He's one of them bucks that went backwards last year as a 9, but he's just a big old brute, got good mass, good tine length. The last couple of years he's probably scored high 160s. He might have hit 170 2 years ago. Last year when he went backwards a little bit, I'm going to say probably 167, 168, and the year before probably 170 to 172. But if that buck could put it all on and, push 180 inches as a clean 10, no, he's not a 200, but I'll tell you what, that's a heck of a buck anywhere. And the way I've got it figured is he's about 7 years old this year. It's going to be a real challenge. He covers a lot of territory. Believe it or not, I've had his pictures on 2 different properties, probably 3 miles apart. But I know where he stays most of the time, especially early. And I got some high hopes on him. There's just
he puts on a couple non-typical points and gets his frame and blows that up. I mean, he could be at the 180 plus mark pretty easy.
Yeah, I get as big a thrill today shooting bucks off of my farm as I do here, because I've got a good one here every year, usually multiple good ones here every year, and I've got my farm set up where if they're here, I can kill them. And when I find these bucks that are not on my farm, they're just on a permission piece, those bucks are way more of a challenge for me, and I like that challenge. And I'll tell you what, it's really rewarding, and my heart beats a lot harder when one of those bucks comes by on a fence row out in the middle of nowhere, or a drainage ditch, or a little wood lot that nobody else is paying attention to. And the only thing I did to get permission was knock on a door and ask a landowner if I can get permission or send them a letter. I'll tell you what, this spring I bet I've sent a dozen letters and knocked on a dozen doors already for permission. But that's one buck that's not on my place. That'd just be a permission property buck that I'm kind of excited to get his first picture and see what he ends up being this year.
Let's get an update about crops. You mentioned earlier that the beans are just starting to come up. How tall is your all's corn? We had just such a wet spring. I know my friends up in Minnesota still don't even have all their crops in. They're having to readjust and even drop down with different seed. What is going on in your area?
Well, it's all planted, for sure. Corn is everywhere from about 3 inches tall to there's some that's probably between my knees and thigh, knees and waist. So there's some that's, pushing waist high. We had one little period of about a day and a half where some of the farmers were able to get in early, and there's some corn around me that got planted early like that, and it's up. It'll probably be waist high by the end of this coming week. Your soybeans, my food plot corn, it's pushing knee high. It's probably not going to miss my knees by much. My soybeans aren't but about maybe 3 or 4 inches tall.
Yep.
I've seen some soybeans. In fact, I've seen another field today that I hadn't noticed before, but there's some beans around that are a foot tall.
Yeah. The big thing around Kentucky this week is how much hay is on the ground. It has been a mad dash for the last 2 days, and the amount of alfalfa and first cutting of hay, every single field's on the ground, and they're rolling it right now. So that's the big thing, is everybody's cutting hay right now.
Well, it's supposed to be a good week for it. It's not supposed to rain all week, and temperatures here in the 90s. So I bet there's a lot of hay put up this week.
Yep. Well, I'm ready to move on to the first question and get those going. Is that all right with you?
That works for me.
All right. Let's put the first one up on the screen and let you read that.
Okay, the first one comes from Drew Peterson from Albion, Michigan. It says, "Hi, Don and Terry. Thank you for all the content you provide us on habitat management. On your June 2nd Chasing Giants podcast, you briefly discussed your fruit trees and spraying them. I've also heard you talk about putting fruit trees out in the sanctuary or edges of the sanctuary or deer woods and leaving them go and let the fittest trees survive. You have many years of experience planting fruit trees and managing a tree nursery. Do you just treat the fruit trees with spray that are near your house and that you pick and eat? And if so, what are you spraying on your apples and pears as a rule? Do you leave the apple trees that are out in the sanctuary and on the edges of the sanctuary alone to reduce intrusion, or do you still go out to those, say, once a year to prune and spray? What do you recommend for us habitat managers in terms of fruit trees? My approach has been finding disease-resistant varieties such as Gold Rush, Enterprise, Liberty, and some of the new trees at Gingrich Tree Farm, then protecting them with a tube or cage from the deer rub attacks and a wrap around the lower part of the tree from voles and mice, plus a 3x3 weed mat stapled down to at least initially control the competition around the young tree for nutrients and water, then walk away and hopefully a high % survival rate. What are your fundamentals regarding planting fruit trees on your private property to bring the deer aboard? Thanks, Drew." Well, Drew, a lot of things to dig in there with your questions. So, first of all, you got to start with trees that are disease resistant. There's actually charts on the internet that you can find that will list the various varieties of apple trees, and it'll also cross-reference those with the various apple tree diseases, things like cedar apple rust, fungus, fire blight, whatever. And you can then make an educated, decision on which trees to plant by using that chart. You mentioned some of the good ones there that are disease resistant. Probably 3 really good ones of the better known varieties. I'd say Freedom, Liberty, and Yates is a good one if you can find that. But Freedom, Liberty, and Enterprise, Gold Rush, as you mentioned, are good ones. But then the ones that Gingrich sells, those trees were selected. I think we went through this in the past, but it probably is worth mentioning again. The way those trees were developed is Andy Andreas, who is partnered with Jay Gingrich, he bought a tree nursery, or an apple orchard rather, that had been neglected for 20 years. So for 20 years, these trees had not been pruned, had not been sprayed, had zero maintenance. They were just left to fend for themselves. A lot of those trees died, but there was a handful that were still very productive. And Andy started these trees that Jay is selling from those trees. There was a process he went through. He tested them out in various locations without sprays for disease resistance. Apples are not native to the United States. They're native of Kazakhstan or one of them Stan countries over there in the Middle East. And they typically grow in a much drier environment than what we have here in the United States. And the humidity and the moisture causes a lot of fungal issues on the leaves. The big issue with apple trees, the diseases are typically have to do with the leaves, and it's typically got to do with the fungus due to our moisture. So that's what these trees Jay's selling, came from the most disease-resistant stock. I think we told the story. I don't know if we told it on here. I know we did on a video that we did for the Whitetail Master Academy, but there was a a lady from Ohio State University that was over in one of those foreign countries doing a 2-year apple study. And one of her colleagues seen these trees that Andy was propagating, told her about it. She came back to see him from wherever she was at over there and was so impressed that she aborted her 2-year study overseas to study these trees that Andy developed and that Jay Gingrich is now selling. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that went into those trees. To dig deeper into your questions, you talk about spraying. At my farm, it's survival of the fittest. When I plant a tree, fruit tree especially, I'm going to baby that tree the first year. I'm going to give it a little bit of care the second year, and after that, it's survival of the fittest. If it can't make it after I've got it going for 2 years, then I want it to die right off the bat so I can stick another one in there that'll hopefully live. So the only thing I'm spraying on my trees is Mike's Mighty Micros, that micronutrient product that's sold at Ocall Valley Orchard there in Sullivan. A good friend of mine, Mike Mitchell, sells that. Spray that on, and I just did my third spraying this week of my new planting. The first time I sprayed them, these are all trees that were just planted this spring. They were planted back in March, I think it was. Austin came and helped me plant them, actually. But first time I sprayed them, these trees are just starting to leaf out and everything. I spray them. I go back and I spray them the second time, and yeah, they leafed out a little more, but I didn't see too much difference. And this week I went back and sprayed them for the third time, and some of these trees literally have a foot of new growth on them that were planted this spring as bare root. So I'm starting to become a real believer in Mike's Mighty Micros, but that's the only thing I spray on. Now I did mix some stuff that my wife got at Home Depot for the cicadas that were on some of them. And it didn't seem to have any impact. I mixed that stuff with the Mike's Mighty Micros and sprayed on them, and those cicadas, it didn't seem to bother them whatsoever. It might have, because when I sprayed them this week, there wasn't near as many cicadas on. But one thing that was interesting that I noticed is that there were trees that had a lot more cicadas than others. I got one orchard I planted this spring that's got like 30-some trees in it. I think there's about 34 or so trees. And you go, and of those 34, there's probably 20 different varieties. There's some that I have 2 of, but most of them are just, they're all different. And you can go down the row as you're spraying, and you can see that this variety is just absolutely covered with cicadas, and the next one doesn't have a single cicada on it. So there is some sort of resistance to those bugs, I guess, bred into them because it's not from the spray. Anyway, you asked about trees in the sanctuary. If I'm going to plant a fruit tree in my sanctuary, it's only going to be where I got a stand. I'm not just going to randomly scatter them through. They're going to be on the edges because all my stands are on the edge. But to really enhance those stand sites, sometimes I will plant, 2 or 3 or 4 fruit trees to just encourage deer to come to that edge even more than they would anyway. But those trees that I've got in my sanctuary have all been established for several years. And if I was going to do that today, yeah, I would go in and I'd take care of them for the first couple of years, but that would be it. And then I'd get out and stay out. The other thing I want to mention from your submission there was you talked about putting those plastic weed mats down around your trees and stapling them to the ground. I highly discourage that. I found back when I had the tree nursery and I was literally planting hundreds of thousands of trees on different projects every single year, and did that for the 17 years I owned that business. And what happens with those plastic weed mats, and I was putting a weed mat down and I was putting a little bit of mulch on top of it as well to kind of hold it in place, and help hold moisture in too. But what happened was those trees would root on top of the surface of the ground right under that plastic. And so years later, if something happened to that plastic, the mulch deteriorated and the wind or whatever ripped that plastic, those tree roots were on top of the ground exposed. You do not want to use those plastic mats. I would highly discourage it. I don't care if you're talking about fruit trees or oak trees or conifer trees. Yeah, don't use those plastic mats. They will root right up, right under it, right on top of the ground. That's my tree speech for the night.
Yeah, he did talk about the cages for around the rubs. We've talked about that multiple times. We talked about using screen to keep mice or moles or rabbits from girdling the trees. You can go back to prior episodes and listen into those. So, a lot of stuff in that question, Drew. Thanks for submitting one, but we're going to move on to the next one.
The next one comes from William Jakowski from Nashville, Tennessee. He says, thanks for the great podcast you guys put out. I really appreciate how you guys combine great deer hunting knowledge with great life advice and intertwine your faith into the mix as well. One of my favorite parts of the podcast is when Don goes on a rant, so I am going to try to get him fired up with a couple of questions. Well, I'm not sure that's going to happen, William, but we'll see. It says, Don, I have listened very closely on recent episodes where you described how you are converting your food plots to a more all-natural approach using regenerative ag practices. Some time back, you guys made fun of the big crimper rollers that are often used by others in this process. Have you changed your mind on these crimper rollers, and will you ever buy one? On a political note, what do you think will happen in this country if they put Trump in jail? Will we have a civil war? I will grab some popcorn and eagerly await your answer. Thank you. Well, William, for the crimper roller thing, let's be clear that in our previous discussions, we said there is a place for that. It's not like we said they're junk. Nobody should ever buy one. There is a place for those. I said I would never buy one, and the reason I am not a fan of them is because the crop that you are crimping has to be at the right stage in the growth cycle for that crimper to work well. What I mean by that, if you go to crimp rye, for example, and you try to do it when that rye is too young, not fully matured, a lot of it is going to spring right back up and just like it was never crimped. The other thing is the ground conditions have to be right. You know, if it's a little bit too muddy, that crimper is going to pick up mud, and it's not going to do a good job. So most food plotters are not farmers. They're not sitting there on the farm waiting for the conditions to be perfect. And when the conditions are perfect, they run out and hook onto the crimper and away they go. Most food plotters have other jobs. They got the weekends to get their plots in, maybe take a vacation day from work. And I just think that the odds of a food plotter catching the right time to be doing the crimping is a very low odds proposition. Now, sure, it might happen some years, but there's going to be a lot of years that it's going to be very difficult for that to happen. So just trying to play the odds. I know those crimpers are also very expensive. The question is, have I changed my mind? No, at this point, I have not changed my mind on the crimpers. Again, I totally get that they have their place. I'm not discouraging anyone from not buying one. Not making fun of anyone that does buy one, but I'm not going to be doing it. I am becoming a bigger and bigger fan of cover crop. One of my plots that's in right next to my backyard was growing in rye that I drilled soybeans into. And, rye gives off a toxin that actually will control a lot of weeds. It'll prevent a lot of other plants from growing, a lot of weeds. And but soybeans is not one of them. You don't want to go planting corn into rye. That rye will absolutely affect your corn. But soybeans can tolerate whatever that toxin is. And I actually, I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of cover crops. And I'm exploring or experimenting with some different things. Dwayne is actually getting me some various seed species that are not real common that I'm going to be playing with a little bit here on the farm. But as far as the crimper, no, I haven't changed my mind. Next question was about if they put Trump in prison, will there be a civil war? I don't believe there will ever be a civil war. I'm not going to go on no rant here, and I'm not going to turn this into a big political speech, but real quick, I don't think, first of all, there's no way for a civil war to become organized. The government is it's got a handle on all our communications. There's just no way that an organized civil war could take place. It would be squashed in a day, by the federal government. So that's not going to happen. If they put Trump in prison, I will make a bold prediction. I will say Trump will win he will win at least 45 of the 50 states this fall. Biden will win no more than 5 states. I'll give him California. I'll give him Illinois, probably Oregon and Washington, and one other. So how's that? How's that for a bold prediction? Trump will win at least 45 states of the 50. What do you think, Terry? Am I right?
I don't know. I don't think that we'll have a civil war because I don't think there's enough people in this country that will truly sacrifice what it would take to do it. I think there's a lot of people that talk, but to truly do a civil war and truly fight, you have to ultimately sacrifice everything. And I think we're too spoiled for that. I really believe
agree.
that.
Absolutely.
You look back at history, at what the people who fought in the Revolutionary and the Civil War, where they fought on our home turf, where we had battles in our backyards, what they gave up, the price that they paid with their jobs, their land, their families, their lives. We don't have that kind of sacrifice in our DNA today. So I don't think that there will be a civil war.
I agree. I'll make another prediction. I'll bet in November it's not Trump and Biden. One or both those guys will be gone. They're going to try to kill Trump or lock him in prison, get him off the ballot. And Biden is the guy's just incapable of even, making a statement.
Well, this will be proof that we can't get any information out because there's no way that we're not going to get flagged for this episode. I can tell you that. On to question number 3.
This one comes from Mylan King from Hardinsburg, Kentucky. He says, Don and Terry, thanks for putting out the podcast every week for us to listen to. This year I bought a bag of NutriCrave corn to plant and was planning on planting it right up against regular ag corn, but got to thinking that maybe it would cross-pollinate and take away the benefits of NutriCrave. So should I plant it in the same field as regular ag corn? If you have the opportunity, Mylan, I would not plant it in the same field as regular ag corn. That will cross-pollinate. Seen an example in Iowa last year where some NutriCrave was planted right next to some regular ag corn. In fact, I'm not even sure the planter boxes were totally cleaned out when the switch was made to the NutriCrave, and the nutrient content of that corn was a little bit disappointing. And no doubt it was due to cross-pollination. So it definitely will cross-pollinate and bring the nutrient levels down. Isolate it as much as you can. I know in the Midwest that's not always possible with all the cornfields and such that we got, but if you can at all isolate your NutriCrave corn plot, it'll definitely help the nutrient content.
This is probably the only one that we have a asterisk beside Dare to Compare. A true side-by-side, because there is a caveat to this. If you put it next to something that'll cross-pollinate, you will see the effects of that.
Yep.
All right. Oop, I hit the wrong button. Give me a second. Here it goes.
This one comes from Bo Finley from Weatherford, Texas. It says, how long does it take to gather enough data on a new hunting property to consistently be successful on that property? Data equals deer bedding, travel routes to food and bedding, seasonally do deer stay on the property, pinch points, thermals, etc. My thoughts is by the end of second year, we should know a lot, but by the end of third year, we should have enough data and boots in stand to be successful on a property. Enjoy y'all's stuff, especially because I know you love deer and Jesus, but Jesus is first. Well, thanks, Bo. I remember back when I was a young whippersnapper and met Alan Foster, and we used to have those talks years ago, and he'd often say that when you get permission on a new property, it's the third year when you should really start cashing in. It takes you 2 years hunting a property to learn it, and by the third season is when you should really start cashing in on what that property can produce. And it's kind of an attitude that I've accepted and stayed with all these years. I think today with trail cameras and such, we could cut that down. The other thing is every property is going to be different. There's smaller properties that you can learn in one season, and maybe it might not even take you a season. I think there's actually properties that I could walk today and be as successful the first season as I would 10 years down the road. Now, that's not every property, but the other thing is, what are you allowed to do on that property as far as setting it up and managing it? Because if it's a permission property where you can't do anything, your hands are tied a little bit more, and obviously it's going to take you a little more time, but a lot of factors come into play. But I think you pretty much hit it on the nail on the head when you said third season. That's something that I heard probably 40 years ago from Al, and stick by that to this day.
Yeah. Not only are you learning the property, but other people aren't hunting it, and you're controlling what gets shot. That's a big part of it too.
Yep. Yeah, lots of factors come into play on, so many different questions. And the big one is the property itself. That's one that we can go down of all the questions that get submitted to us. We give an answer, but that answer is not absolute. That answer can fluctuate from property to property a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, even like what you said, we go in with one of our plans and we change the habitat and we create funnels and edges with great access. You put that plan in place, you can kill every deer on the property the first year that the plan's in place. Now, whether those are the right deer you're targeting or whether you have to let the property evolve, that's a different story, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, if you can manage a farm and do what you want with it, you should be able to kill every buck there. I mean, it might take 2 or 3 years to get all the projects done and get everything enacted. Well, once it's set up, you should be good to go.
Yep. Indeed. All right, here's number 5.
This one comes from Mylan Yoder from Millersburg, Ohio. It says, "Hello, Don and Terry. Thanks for all you do. I like the podcast. On a recent podcast, you said if you were in a state legal for baiting, you would put 2 feeders, one in each end of your food plot. If so, what would you be feeding the deer since you are not fond of just a corn pile? Also, what difference does it make to go in and fill the feeders every so often or fill a water hole with water every so often? I just imagine you would put the water hole in the same area the feeders would be in. Thanks and God bless." Well, Mylan, if I had feeders, or was allowed to put feeders on a property, which we can do on our Ohio properties, I'd be using Real World's Complete Feed. I think it's got everything in it that a deer needs, and I can't imagine that there's anything better. So that's what I would be using. In regards to your water question, that's a great question because you make a very valid point. What's it matter if you're going in with water or if you're going in with feed? Here's the difference, in my opinion. In the Midwest, actually, most properties, water is not a limiting factor. And I say that I've shared this story many times on this podcast as well, but it's been a while. But I know a situation or a location where every single summer there's a bachelor group of bucks on this section of ground. They're there every day. You can drive by in the evenings. You can see them feeding in the fields. Those bucks are there every day in the summer. Every year, that bachelor group is back. I do not know of a single water source on that entire section, not even a little mud puddle. It's all crop fields, hedgerows, and small woodlots, and there's no water, period. Those deer, I think, are getting that. Well, they have to. They're getting the majority of the moisture they need through the green plants that they're eating. And maybe they're going somewhere else at night getting water that I don't know of, but I also don't know, once you get off of that section, those deer got to go a ways to get to a water source. But yet those deer are there day after day after day every summer. I think water is way overrated. Now, is it critical? Yeah. If you get out into the plain states, where it's more arid, say out in Kansas, Nebraska, Dakotas, then that could be a totally different story. Water could be a limiting factor, but I think through most of the country, and that's not to say a deer won't utilize a water source. You put out a water hole or whatever on your property, well, absolutely they're going to use it. But I don't think it's a difference maker on most properties. And again, I'm not talking every property. I'm saying most properties in the Midwest, water is not going to be a limiting factor. I also want to point out that I've said many times, I am not against water holes or some water source whatsoever. It's the human intrusion that I'm against. And if you can cut down the human intrusion, I mean, you're way ahead of the game. You know, recently I was asked.
Every time we've talked about this, it's been because somebody's got a water hole deep inside their woods or right underneath of their stand. That's where the problem is, whether it's a feeder or a water hole or a trail camera on the edge of a food plot where you can get in and out in the middle of the day and you're not blowing your scent inside the sanctuary. And that intrusion's the same, whether you're there filling a bucket, a kiddie pool, or a feeder. People are just taking us way too literally. We're talking about going into parts of your property and doing stuff and putting pressure on it. And I think the last one that we showed a picture of on this podcast was way back in the woods, and there's a buried stock tank in the ground that somebody had to go in and fill. Right.
Actually, you know, I'm currently editing the next issue of Whitetail Life magazine. And Aaron Gaines has an article on water supplementation. It's going to be coming out in that issue. So I don't know if the listeners are subscribed to Whitetail Life, but that magazine I am the editor for, and I do a lot of land management type stuff. Got a lot of different people contributing. Dr. Strickland has a monthly column in there. Dwayne Hopkins has a monthly column on food plots. Lee Mitchell, who I think is one of the most overlooked deer hunters in the whole country. The guy's super, super good, but most people have not heard of him. Bobby Worthington has had an article in the last issue and the one upcoming. But anyway, in the next issue, there's going to be a good article on water supplementation. And I'm not sure I agree with everything Aaron says, but that magazine is not Don's opinion. There's a lot of different people contributing. And I welcome, views other than my own. So you guys might want to check that out.
All right. Well, let's get the last question in for the evening, and we'll wrap the show up here.
Last one comes from John Stewart from Unionville, Iowa. Says, hey, Don and Terry, I have a few feeders spread out through my property, and something I have noticed is the number of ticks that are on the deer this year. In general, the ticks have come out in full force this year, but when I have seen deer this year, there seems to be many ticks behind their ears and on the back of their heads. Is this something to worry about, or is there something I can add to my feeders to help the deer with their tick problem? I currently add garlic to my feeders because I have heard that has several benefits to the deer. Thanks again for all that the both of you do for the hunting industry. Keep up the great work. You know, the interesting thing about this, Terry, is I've had a lot of people comment on how bad the ticks are this year, but I have not seen it whatsoever. I mean, I'm out every single day, and there he is holding up his prescription.
My third round of antibiotics because I keep getting bitten by the things. It's been unbelievable how many ticks I've gotten on me.
I probably pulled 2 ticks off of me all year, and there's been times in the past where I pulled 3 or 4 every time I go out. But this year, I have just not seen it. But to answer the question, the Expect Healthy Deer technology from Real World has some anti-parasitic ingredients in it that will help with that. That's one of the ways that it helps with EHD, is it prevents the deer from getting it by the anti-parasitic ingredients that's in it. So any Real World product that has Expect Healthy Deer, Maximizer Plus mineral has got it. The new deer blocks have got it. The complete feed and the feed supplements got it. But that will help to some degree. The key factor really is getting a regular dose into your deer. So if a deer is going to come by and stick his nose in the mineral and lick 3 times once every 2 weeks, he's not going to get enough to do much of anything. The key is getting a deer to regularly ingest some of that Expect Healthy Deer technology product. And that's going to be the challenge with anything you do with a wild deer. Just getting them. It's not like we're dealing with livestock. If it's something that they feed on, how are you going to get them to feed on it every day or every couple days? if it's a spray. I know I seen some guy had invented some kind of a feeder where that when the deer walks up to it, it triggers something, and there's a sprayer at each little feed nozzle that the deer sticks his nose in it, and it triggers, and there's a sprayer that shoots mist on the deer's back to keep the bugs off. And I think it was designed for combating EHD, to keep those midge gnats away. But there's just been all kinds of things tried. I don't know that we're ever going to have anything that's 100% effective, but the Expect Healthy Deer technology products is what I'd try.
I don't know that, and man, people are going to think this is an arrogant statement, but I don't know that the average guy could go to his feed mill and figure out ingredients like sulfur or garlic or all of these other natural supplements at the right ratios to mix in their feed and ever figure it out and do any good. I know a lot of guys like to play with recipes and stuff like that, but after companies like us and Dr. Aaron Gaines with the company he's with now have spent the amounts of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've had in research, and the captive industry has done the amount of research in it, I'm just telling you the honest truth. You're probably wasting your time playing around with throwing this stuff in your feed and trying to help. That's my honest opinion. You're better off just, if you want to go to that extent, just go buy something that's mixed appropriately for what you're trying to do, like Don was talking about.
Yeah, the Expect Healthy Deer technology, we did not come up with that. We secured the rights to it. We paid a pretty nice sum to have the rights to include that in our products. For the record, I've got emails to prove it. Major feed companies tried to get sole rights to Expect Healthy Deer technology when it first came out. A lot of big name feed companies are actually buying that product and putting it in the feed they manufacture for captive deer breeders. Yeah. So, it's been out on the market for at least 6 years now. Anyway, maybe 7.
You can go to the Real World website and actually see a description of every ingredient in Maximizer Mineral, not the EHD technology, but in Maximizer Mineral, and what that ingredient does for the health of the deer. But my point is, the ratios of how each of those things work together to accomplish the goal is the secret sauce. And just arbitrarily throwing garlic or whatever into feed, it's a waste of time. There's no way somebody could duplicate success or even get to the point they could measure success, and you might as well just straight feed.
I agree.
Well, what do you got cooking this weekend here?
Well, tomorrow's church, and then Monday, Dwayne Hopkins and I and a couple of the others from Real World are going to Mississippi for a business trip down there to meet with a potential company that we may partner with in the South, trying to push Real World products down in the South more. We've got the Midwest not saturated by any means. We got a lot of dealers in the Midwest, but we got some in the South, but we'd like to have a lot more in the South. We think we got some products that would do really well down there. So we're going down on Monday. Well, we're driving down Monday for a meeting first thing Tuesday morning in Mississippi. That'll take my first part of the week. I'm going to also try to get my soybean plots sprayed this week. Got some grasses and little weeds coming up in those that I want to get killed off. And other than that, if it's 90-some degrees every day, I got to finish up this issue of Whitetail Life. So I got a few more articles to edit for that. That'll probably take me till next weekend. I know. Is next weekend your daughter's wedding? It is, isn't it?
It is. Her birthday is tomorrow, and then Father's Day weekend's next weekend. She's getting married next weekend. So we'll probably end up having to record the podcast a little bit earlier, maybe Thursday night, I'm guessing. We need to look at our calendars this week and figure out a time to record. But next weekend's going to be I don't know, man. You've married off 2 daughters. Do you have any advice for me as I go into this thing?
No, at this point it's too late, and I know that you're not going to have a problem because
just pay the bill at the end of the night, right?
Well, what really matters is how those girls were raised, because they're gonna most likely marry a guy with the same values as their father. And I have no doubt that your two daughters are going to pick fantastic guys, just like mine did. When you instill those values in little kids, that seed is planted and it's going to take root, and you're not going to have a thing to worry about. You know, I don't worry about my daughters whatsoever. They both got great husbands. I do not worry about them one lick because I know the great guys they've married, and you're going to be in the same boat.
Yep. Well, we look forward to it. We are very proud of him. We're proud of her. We're proud of him. So it should be a pretty good celebration. We got family coming in town, and can't wait to see everybody. But going to be a busy week leading up to it. So, and then my wife and I actually have a very big long-term career opportunity that we ask everybody to keep us in their prayers. This is a very big business venture for both of us, and could be pretty big. And just say a prayer for us. Hope God's leading us in the direction that's going to glorify Him in everything we do. And when one door closes, one's always going to open, and we hope that it's going to just be another extension of us witnessing and growing the kingdom further. So,
amen. My daughter Andrea has her last 2 radiation treatments this week. She had 30 of them, and the last 2 will be Monday and Tuesday. And then I'd ask for prayers for clean skin once this is all done. She's been through quite the battle, and that girl does not complain about anything. You literally, she could have her arm chopped off, and she wouldn't tell you there was anything wrong. You'd have to pry it out of her. I'm proud of the way she's handled this, but all prayers for 100% cancer free once she's done with these last 2 radiation treatments. That'd be greatly appreciated.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll be back with you on Father's Day next week. So hope everybody has a great week.
God bless everyone. Have a great week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Via Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.